my parents used to say that I would always say I wanted to be a writer from when I was quite a small child. And I've got no memory myself of saying it, but they said that I said it. I think maybe it just starts with the love of reading. You know, I think that I was a child who loved to read, and I lived in a very different media world. You know, I mean, in India when I was growing up, there was no television. You know, it didn't exist. We had radio and movies and books. You know, so books were a natural, very large part of my growing up. You know? And I think I was somebody who responded very strongly to that, entering the world of imagination, you know, somebody else's imagination. And I think when a small child says, I want to be a writer when I grow up, maybe what he means is, I love reading books, you know, and I want to do that thing that I love when other people do it. You know? So maybe that was it. There were a number of different kinds of books and stories that I can remember liking. First of all, I mean, I heard many of the most famous, let's say, Arabian Night stories or Eastern fables. In fact, I heard them really orally from my father, who would tell them to us as bedtime stories in his own versions of them, obviously. You know, he wouldn't read them, he would just simply tell us stories. So the first time I heard about, you know, Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, or Sinbad the Sailor, or Aladdin, whatever, you know, was in these versions of my father. I think even before I knew that there was a book that they came from, you know, I just thought my father was a very good storyteller, these great stories to tell, you know. So there was that, and I mean, I think I've said a lot, but it's true, that to come from that background with this incredible storehouse of fantastic tales as your first literary inheritance, you know, that was important. I mean, you know, and I've carried those stories around with me, you know, all my life, I think, really. But children's stories, I mean, apart from that Eastern tradition, in terms of Western children's stories, some of them showed up and some of them didn't. You know, I mean, as it happens, Hans Christian Andersen did show up, or at least some of them, the famous stories, you know, in an anthology, and so I did read those as a child. And was particularly struck by, I mean, in my memory, the two that I remembered that really affected me were The Snow Queen and The Shadow, which is, you can see that even as a child I had an interest in the dark side, you know, because they're both frightening stories, one with a happy ending and one without one. But also there were much more banal children's books that showed up. I mean, there were a lot of English children's books about children at boarding school. You know, it's like Harry Potter without the magic, just school stories. And I remember reading a lot of those, and I suppose they had something to do with why I said yes when my father asked me if I wanted to go to an English boarding school. And it's because I'd read all these stories about English boarding schools. They seemed like great places, and then, of course, when I showed up there, they weren't at all like that. They were much more unpleasant.